Hey folks, LaTonya here. I am so excited to tell you about a new offering that we have here at Change Coaches. So last year, I was talking to some folks and decided to get an ICF coach training certification for Change Coaches. So woohoo, we have that. And our first program we are launching is Coaching Below the Surface. What is this program? Who is it for? Well, it's for experienced leaders who do coaching in their role. It's for coaches who are credentialed already and they want to do continuing education to be able to renew their credentials. It's for people that are coach curious. What is it going to help you do? Well, it's going to help us relate to people around us better. Did you know that Gen Z is rising, and in relating to Gen Z has been one of the number one leadership issues that our clients talk about? Disability, also neurodivergence is a big workplace issue. And also identities are becoming more multidimensional. So what does this mean? How will Coaching Below the Surface help you? Well, it'll help you because, well, number one, you get ICF coach credits. And number two, it'll help you because we will be in a cohort type environment where you can learn about psychological safety, belonging in coaching, joy in coaching, how to think differently about our client bases. And what will this get you? Well, it'll get you more clients. It'll make you an all-around better coach. It'll get you better ratings as a coach. It will bring you up to speed with today's workplace. So for those of you who are interested, there is a link in the show notes. And please join our waitlist. If you have any questions, you can email us at info@changecoaches.io. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Leading Below the Surface podcast. I'm LaTonya Wilkins, your host, executive coach, founder, and CEO of Change Coaches, and author of Leading Below the Surface. And today I have a repeat guest with us, and I'll tell you the reason why I asked this guest to come back, and we will be having a conversation. And so let me tell you a little bit about why I asked this guest to come back. So we are recording this episode in February of 2025. And if you are in the US, you are very close to some big changes that we've seen in the world, in the, I guess, political and business environment. So we've been seeing all these changes. There's been, by the time this episode's released, it'll change. There'll be different things. But there's just been a lot going on. And it's not just politically, it's also, there's this ripple effect, and it's affecting all of us in our leadership, making decisions. And it's just been very tough for people. And so I invited my good friend, Blythe Landry, who is a trauma coach. She does all kinds of things, trauma coaching, speaking. She's a licensed therapist. She is amazing. And so I'm really excited to bring her in. And we're going to talk a little bit about trauma and how it affects how we lead. And so if you are someone that is going through this right now, you don't have to be in the C-suite. You don't have to be a senior leader. Anything you're leading right now, and you're wondering why it's hard for you, why it feels, why you keep getting stopped, like why maybe you're not leading in the way you want to, this episode is for you. If this isn't you and you know someone that is in this situation, pass this on, because this episode is for them and they will really, really, truly thank you. And so before I introduce Blythe fully, there are a couple of stats that we'll be talking about. So the first one is over 60% of adults report experiencing at least one traumatic event in their lifetime, which Blythe is nodding her head because we do. And I think a lot of times we think this is going to be left at home, but it's not. And again, I've seen this over the last couple of weeks here at Change Coaches. Nearly 70% of employees believe their leaders don't handle stress well. And I'll be vulnerable. I've been told that by my team. And so it's understanding that and being open to that feedback and understanding, again, the why behind it and how to shift that. This one is really interesting because I think we're seeing this one playing out. Number 3, Leaders with unresolved trauma are more likely to default to authoritarian or avoidant leadership styles. Folks, that is a lot. And avoidance are really hard people, challenging for me to deal with. And Blythe and I will get into that and leadership. And the last one that I will, actually, there's 5. So I'm going to share all of them. So 4 is leaders with high emotional intelligence create teams that outperform others by 20 to 30%. So again, understanding yourself, self-awareness. And then the last one, this one, Blythe, you're going to love this one. But childhood trauma is linked to increased levels of workplace burnout and imposter syndrome. And so, and I can tell you that my journey on working through all that stuff, yes, this is very true. I would be burnt out. I would be spinning my wheels. And I'd be going back. It was weird because I was like, oh, am I going back to something like in my childhood? Like, what is going on here? And so let me introduce Blythe. So again, Blythe is a good friend of mine. She wrote a fantastic book called Trauma Intelligence. She coaches, she's a therapist, she speaks, she's worked with some amazing organizations. So welcome, Blythe. What did I leave out about you?
Nothing other than the only thing I do, trauma and grief both. And they're often very commingled, right? But you did a great job of introing me. Great job.
Tell us what you're excited about right now.
I moved to Pennsylvania a year ago, which has been a big change for my partner and I, but I've been able to really integrate with her family. I have 5 step-grandchildren now, which I never saw coming in my life. I am a childless step-grandparent, which is amazing. I have, obviously, I'm really obsessed with my dogs. I have 2 awesome dogs, and one just had surgery. And in the way of work, I'm very excited because I've created this program for people who have experienced a lot of grief and a lot of trauma. And it teaches them to take their pain and turn it into a purpose, because we know that while we cannot control the things that befall us in childhood and beyond, we do have a choice in how we respond. Right. And so I'm super excited about this program. I'm training other people to be trauma-informed grief coaches, and I couldn't be prouder of the community. So that's the work thing that I'm most excited about, right?
I'll leave that link in the show notes, folks, because that's something that I might even do with Blythe, because she's definitely one of the best. And I've been able to watch Blythe. It's interesting because I talk about the book, Let Them, a lot, because I really like that book and I just finished it. And, when I think about Blythe moving to Pennsylvania and like having this whole new life, in her book, she talks about friendships and how they change, and you let them and you be happy for them. Like I remember I used to be scared and I'm like, oh no, is she going to disappear and all this stuff. And like, so this is like one of those things when you let them, you let people grow, you let them thrive. And so it's been really fun to see that with you, Blythe.
I love that. And actually, I just finished that audio book yesterday, Let Them. And at the end of the book, she's talking about workplace, and she's talking about workplace trauma, like how we bring our years from childhood into the workplace. So that book is outstanding. And I love that piece about friendship, and I love that piece about work as well.
So, you talk about these grief coaches and so like you talk about, some of the therapy that you do and the coaching you do. So how many of those leaders come to you, or how many of those people come to you around leadership? And another question is, do they know how aware are people of their trauma and how it's affecting them in day-to-day life?
This is an interesting, small percentage of the population. So I'll say that everyone that comes to me for this is a person who has had grief and trauma, who's looking specifically to turn it into a purpose, right? So this population is actually very conscious of what's going on with them, right? But when you look at the larger world of people, we're not taught. There's a lot of conversation about trauma. There's a lot of conversation about grief, but we're not taught how this applies to every area of our lives, right? So how we grow up informs everything going forward. It informs how we think, how we feel, how we respond, like you shared it very vulnerably about yourself, how we respond to stress, how we respond to an environment, and how we perceive the world. And even if we don't think certain things that happened in childhood, like abuse, like neglect, like growing up in a home with addiction, informed our behaviors, it absolutely does, because even if we're not reacting to those past things intentionally in the present, how we perceive the people before us informs how we respond, right? And so if I grow up with a very, very fearful view, let's say, of authority figures, and I work in an environment where someone looks like, sounds like, or even suggests that I might need to improve on something, I may take that as an ultimate attack and be unable to receive that information. Or let's say I am C-suite. Let's say I am one of the largest leaders in the organization. If I was raised to feel like nothing I ever did was good enough, and I have someone on my team who is a star, instead of feeding that and supporting them and helping nurture their development, I might subtly or overtly minimize them. I might reject them. I might be so insecure, regardless of my status, that I don't support my team member and I hurt them so that I look bigger or more powerful than they do. And those are things that happen every day in the workplace. I've had a boss like that in the past, and it's a horrible thing to experience. And I can't emphasize enough the importance not to shame yourself, but to really be aware of how people feel around you and the thoughts and the feelings that are going on inside in relationship to your team, because these relationships are a direct reflection of what you perceive about the world, of what you perceive about yourself, and what you perceive about what you can and cannot have in the world.
Yeah, that's interesting how you might just ignore something or like evade something. Like when you were talking about, like someone might mention something and the way that you deal with it, it's really based on, or the way you respond is based on your history. So, we do a lot of workshops on resilience, and, it's interesting because, and this relates to what we're talking about. But one of the things that often comes up in these workshops is people are like, it's really hard for me to have empathy for people that are upset that they didn't get Taylor Swift tickets or something like that, or they didn't get their favorite pair of sneakers, that Nike sneakers that were out on the market, or things like that. So, I want to talk about what is a traumatic event and how should we be thinking about that? Because, I do also wonder, the reason why I'm asking this too, again, like I said earlier, we're in kind of a interesting place in US and in the world. And like, I think some of it is we can't have empathy for each other. Like, and I'm not saying it has to be superfluous, but like, what is a traumatic event? And is that who defines that?
I want to distinguish between two things: traumatic event and traumatic experiences, like long-term experiences, right? So a traumatic event is something in which the person on the receiving end of it feels unsafe, out of control, in danger, terrified, surprised in a way that is very, very scary or painful. So if you're looking at childhood, you're looking at neglect, abuse, sexual, molestation, feeling like, nothing you ever do is in any way good enough, constantly being yelled at, constantly getting mixed messages. Those are sort of traumatic events. And then the constantly getting mixed messages and that actually bleeds over into traumatic experiences. So there's a one-time event, and then there are things that go on over and over and over and over and over. And that's where you're getting that complex post-traumatic stress disorder piece, where people are actually always in a fight or flight mode based on how they were raised. In terms of adulthood, a traumatic event is something that is big, right? Something that is a car accident, seeing something that's violent, right? experiencing a traumatic loss of somebody that to a car accident or to a murder or to something like that, having a family member that becomes incarcerated, right? Witnessing something that finding someone that you love that has passed away and walking in on that. Traumatic events are a big deal. Here's the thing though, it's all relative. Because based on how I perceive the world, how I grew up, and based on my understanding of what is hard and not hard, right? I may perceive something as much more catastrophic than someone else who has had a lot of trauma, who would think something that I would think is catastrophic is not that bad, right? So, but to your point about getting Taylor Swift tickets or sneakers, that is absolutely not a traumatic event, right? It didn't cause the person lack of safety, lack of security, lack of ability to choose if they were in or out of a situation. But I think if someone is looking for why they can't have empathy for that, perhaps look at the thing in the person that you can relate to. Find something about that person that you do like, that you do find compassion for, and relate to them from that event. Let's say I had a lot of trauma, and my trauma was, let's say I grew up in an addict home where there was always disappointment, right? And maybe in my mind, going to that concert is like something I really, really want. And I am disappointed that I didn't get tickets. A lot of people with trauma are also look at things that are disappointing as despairing events, right? Because they feel like it's just another disappointment. So that's another way that you can relate to someone. And like, if you're not having that empathy, be like, but in context, this was just another disappointment for them.
It's kind of like that saying, like, what you're reacting to is not what's going on right now. Maybe it was going on 10 years ago. The idea of collective trauma, like, first of all, I'd love to hear what you think of that word, but like, I think, or that phrase, but it's like, I do wonder if just in the world, we all are experiencing that, right? Like, because the world's getting harder and harder. And I wonder, again, that Taylor Swift tickets might be related to, I don't know, like what you said, like, this is just enough, like it's additive, right?
Yeah. And I remember one time, I'll talk about my own trauma responses, but I remember one time when I was in my 20s and I had so many my life was falling apart, right? All around me, I was getting a divorce. I was having to move out. I was having to change everything. I had a new job, which is not traumatic, but it's another change. And I was at a restaurant and this place I frequented because one of my trauma responses is to like have really rigid routines that are familiar, which is not uncommon for people with trauma. And I was at dinner and they were out of this bread that I always got there. And I didn't get upset. Tears just streamed the face. And one might think that's insane, but it was just, is there anywhere I can go where I can find something familiar is really where that was coming from, right? It was coming from like, everything in my life is not going the way I want. And this is just a metaphor for everything in my life, right? And so was I overreacting? No, not if you look at the whole context of my entire life at that time, right? But was I, to someone who didn't know me or didn't know my entire life situation, that would have been ridiculous.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to laugh at you. If you're watching us on YouTube, I was laughing. And the reason why I was laughing is because, and now you've taught me something, because I went to a sound bath. Like, I love the sound baths for meditation. I went to one a couple weeks ago and there was a woman there, and it's snowing in Chicago. It's freezing. And she refused to take her shoes off. And she was like yelling at the instructor because he was like, this is just, and it was going to be wet for us. And it probably wasn't going to be a good experience for her, but he ended up letting her keep her shoes on. So yeah, so it's like that, right? Like maybe there was, because I mean, I felt bad for him because of the way that she was reacting.
Yeah. And maybe she was just not a nice person. And maybe her spouse had just had an affair. Her child had gotten a DUI. And there was this confluence of events that made her really get obsessed with something irrelevant.
Yeah, yeah.
We don't know.
I was really trying to like not say, and I didn't say anything, but I was like, wow, like this guy is making this event for us, and she's behaving this way.
Depending on his experience, that could have been traumatic for him.
Yeah, I mean, it probably. I mean, it was just like because I think he was trying to get in his flow before he had a room full of people, so it was kind of it was really nice, but that's been a big solace for me. I'm really happy to live in Chicago because there's so much, and it's diverse but like so the third thing I want to talk about, and I'm a attachment styles nerd. I like read these books. I'm like really into them. So the third one is that the fact I mentioned is leaders with unresolved trauma are more likely to default to authoritarian or avoidant leadership styles. What is an avoidant leadership style? And like, how does that compare to being an avoidant in a relationship? In any relation, not just romantic, but friendships as well.
Well, how we do one thing is typically how we do everything, right? And so if I'm an avoidant leader, I'm someone who doesn't like to have conflict that has any emotion involved, which is hard to do when you've been working with someone for a long time or you're there every day, all day, right? So there can be a coldness. There can be a coldness in resolving conflict or bringing information to someone. Let's say somebody comes to your office and they're overly emotional about something going on in their life, and you're trying to talk to them about work. You could be very dismissive. You could be very repulsed by that behavior, because at the end of the day, someone who's avoidant is terrified of being consumed. And on the flip side of that, they're also afraid of abandonment, right? So things that seem unnecessarily emotional, things that seem inefficient, right? Things that seem less work focused and more relational focused can be a huge trigger for someone who's avoidant. And avoidant attachers have trauma too, right? And they are often people who grew up with neglect or being ignored or sometimes inconsistent parenting. And so these things feel like threats to them. So it's not something that you can just change by noticing it. It's something that you would have to work on and change through deep, deep, deep personal, professional help work, right? The thing about it, though, is the avoidant tends to get their needs met in outside of relationship. So achievement, work, busyness, athleticism, travel, things that do not require deep emotional bonds. They crave emotional bonds, but once they're in it, they don't like it very much at all until that is worked on and changed, right? And then the flip side of that would be someone with, let's say, an anxious attachment style. They'd be constantly seeking reassurance from their supervisor or even their team. They'd be overworking to try to make everybody else comfortable so that people love them. They'd be overgiving, and then as a result, having their team walk all over them. So both avoidant and anxious attachment styles can cause problems in work environments, and they're both trauma responses.
Thank you for talking about anxious too, but what makes an avoidant leader authoritarian?
Those are two separate responses, it sounds like, from that stat, right? Authoritarian leadership, if you look at how Trump is leading, right? It's very well known that he grew up with a lot of trauma, right? He grew up with an extreme amount of trauma. And so that like, I'm in charge. No one is more powerful than me. I'm going to take over everything. I am the biggest person in the room. I give no one a choice. At the end of the day, that is a deep sense of insecurity and a deep sense of like immaturity, emotional immaturity. And it's a desire to never feel small, to never feel vulnerable, to never take accountability for anything. And that can also be, a major trauma response. And then when you get into like personality disorders, which is a whole separate thing, being avoidant doesn't make you have a personality disorder. Being authoritarian absolutely does, right? Then you're looking into other mental illnesses that cause someone to have that kind of behavior too.
It's interesting with that, like being authoritarian and having trauma. And then the other thing you said with avoidance is like getting everything. I think you said you get everything fulfilled outside of work.
No, outside of relationship.
outside of the relationship, so outside of the team.
Relationship is a desire, but it's a threat, right? And so the minute you feel that someone's too emotionally needy or too close or requires something from you emotionally, you get cold.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Minimize how they're feeling, or you blame, or you aggressive, right? And so that could make people on a team, because look, at the end of the day, we work more than anything else. And we want to feel connected to the people in our work community. And so if you have a leader that doesn't foster that, it can cause fear, it can cause anxiety, it can cause a reawakening of shame in people who have trauma that are on your team. And it makes you feel like you're in the way of this person. That's not an effective leadership style, right?
That's interesting, folks, because like avoidant leadership can be felt as authoritarian because like it's like the person like I've had that boss, and where I like when my sister died and like I couldn't talk to my boss about that. Like so interesting. Yeah, because I was like I ended up leaving the company because it was like the response was, well, you could just take vacation instead of making this. I think, like you said, it was too emotional. It was too much.
It was a threat. And interesting. So I won't say where this was, but I had a boss that was emotionally the most empathetic person on the planet, right? He was stellar and he got fired. And they hired because he was too empathetic. I mean, basically, and this was years ago, but they hired somebody that was authoritarian and also avoidant and not nice and didn't care about people's feelings. We had a team member who had terminal cancer. He was so insensitive. He didn't care. And unless somebody had something that was going to feed his desire for validation, he was cruel. He also pitted us against one another. And so that boss is actually the reason I started working for myself. And I've never for anyone else. So, but the interesting thing here was we had a loving boss. We had a kind, empathetic friend, like that was a team player. That boss encouraged me to like grow, to go out on my own, do all the things. And he was not valued in this community of people that were in charge of the whole organization because he was empathetic. So there's a larger institutional thing that can be at play as well, because avoidants are high producers. They get things done. They're rigid, right? But when you look at the trajectory of that, and I'm sure there's more stats on this, but like over time, you have more people leave. You have less buy-in. So they're good in the short term, but in the long run, people that have any self-esteem at all or choice at all are not going to stick around for a boss like that.
It's interesting because when you were talking about that boss, I was thinking, there's a word that is it's thrown around a lot. And I think it's kind of irresponsible, I guess, but narcissism. And like everybody's a narcissist right now because it's like, yeah, and it's like, I don't think that's true. So what is the relationship between like what you were just saying, like an avoidant or authoritarian leader and narcissism? And is everybody a narcissist that is those styles?
No, because there's not that many real people with narcissistic personality disorder. It's a small segment of the population. But when someone doesn't behave to our liking, we throw that word around, right? Someone who's authoritarian, like really aggressive, controlling, most likely is on that spectrum of having a personality disorder. Borderline personality, narcissistic personality, of which there are numerous subtypes, sociopath. These are all the spectrum of personality disorders that people can have. Someone who's cruel, someone who enjoys hurting their team, that is someone most likely that's dealing with that kind of personality disorder, right? Gaslighting. But someone who's just avoidant, or someone who's just anxious, or someone who just has a very hard time processing emotions is not a narcissist, right? There has to be intent to hurt. There has to be pleasure out of finding someone else in a situation where they're not doing well. That's not what someone who's just a typical avoidant is going to be, right? That's what you can have a lot of trauma and a lot of tendency towards avoidant attachment style and still be a good person, right? There's the thing is too, is that if you're hearing this and you're like, oh, that might be me, it's nothing to be ashamed of, because it's something that you can work on, but you have to be willing to work on like the feeling of repulsion when someone needs you, or the feeling of anger when someone goes more emotional than you're comfortable with, or being cold, because at the end of the day, you're not going to get the results from your team that you want if that's how you're going to treat them.
I love how you're saying you don't have to be, I think you said you don't have to be upset with yourself, but like, so what do we do about this? So maybe we could spend the last few minutes on this. Like, what if someone's listening today and they're like, oh my gosh, like that's me. And what do we do about it?
Well, if you haven't already gotten help, you have to get help, right? The next thing I would ask yourself is not only how this is affecting work, but how is it affecting my relationships outside of work? How is it affecting my spouse, my kids, my friends, my family? And the answer is almost inevitably, it's affecting everyone. And then ask yourself, inside of myself, is this how I want to make people I love or care for or work with feel? Do I really want to make people feel like they're too much for me? Do I really want to make people feel like every emotion they have is like over the top or ridiculous? That's probably not how you want to make people feel. So you have to be willing to get some help. Take a course on avoidant attachment style. Learn that you can self-soothe yourself. You can find soothing for that anxiety that feels overwhelmed by other people's over the top in your perception feelings. And you can learn to respond in ways that are more compassionate, but also give yourself that compassion to know that while it's not your fault that you respond this way, it is absolutely your responsibility to work on it. Professional help, take a course, get into meditation and learn how to get comfortable with feelings in a moment that you can't escape from. Things like that can be really helpful. And, and also if you really notice this, the biggest step you can take to start is telling your team that you realize that you're dealing with this and you're going to work on it. Because at the end of the day, being vulnerable with them will give them a chance to respect you more.
That's a big, folks, she's really challenging you.
And avoidants are the least likely personality disorder to get help. I mean, not personality disorder, excuse me, attachment disorder, attachment fissure to get help. Okay. So, I mean, you have to be very brave, because I can promise you that everyone knows you're doing this. It's not a secret to them. And everyone's talking about it, and they don't like it. And they're looking for other jobs. They're looking for ways to get away from you. And that's not, at the end of the day, who you are on the inside. And it would be much more beneficial to you to learn how to express who you are on the inside instead of these defense mechanisms that are keeping everybody at bay and afraid of you.
I second what Blythe is saying. I mean, I think meditation has changed my life. And you don't have to do a lot of it. You could just do the Calm app. And that's something that I teach my students as well, is we go through mindfulness practices. I also do energy work. And I think that's been I don't want to say bad. It's been a great complement to other stuff. And I think when I first heard of energy work, I thought, this is woo woo. And I read Eastern Body, Western Mind, and some other books like that. And it's really like, I just think that those things, like just getting your energy right, it's like once you do that, like, and I was telling Blythe before we started recording, it's like you start vibrating at a different level and people notice it. And it's like your mindset, like you're less likely to get irritated and have an outburst, right?
Oh, I've been doing it every day for almost a year now. I really committed to it, and it makes a huge difference in your responses, in your perceptions. And you can do 5 minutes a day. You can do 20 minutes a day. You don't have to do like advanced meditation. It's a willingness to pause, right? Energy work is hugely helpful. Yoga, going for walks, again, getting professional help, taking a course. You have to be willing to pause, and you have to be willing to receive help in order to get better at something like this. And it's possible. People get better from attachment style stuff every day, but it's hard work. And ask yourself, is it worth it so that I can be the kind of person that people at work like being around? It probably is.
So let's move to the last question, because this is really interesting. And this was the stat I talked about. Childhood trauma is linked to increased levels of workplace burnout and imposter syndrome. So I'd love to hear from you, Blythe. Why is that? And what are some of the things we can do around that? We could talk a little bit about imposter syndrome as well.
So kind of like what you shared at the beginning about your own stress responses, right? So we're going to have more workplace burnout if things over which we can't control, or things where we are telling ourselves we're pressured, or things where we feel like we might get in trouble, whatever the case may be for your particular kind of trauma, that is going to lead to more burnout. Because if our reactions are hypervigilant, fight or flight, always, the cortisol levels going off all the time, then we're going to be more likely to burn out, right?
Cortisol. Say more about cortisol.
I'm not a scientist, right? So your cortisol hormone is a stress response, right? It affects everything, how you sleep, how you respond. It's basically what we call fight or flight, being in fight or flight.
And weight. It affects weight and inflammation too. Like I do want to say that.
Sure.
Yeah. Inflammation. Well, not necessarily weight. I'm not saying that in a bad way, folks, or a judgmental way, but it affects inflammation, which swells up our body.
100%.
Yes. Okay, keep going.
If I'm always in fight or flight, the lion is chasing me, then I'm reacting over and over. I'm causing stress responses over and over. Everything in my body doesn't know how to respond. That level of response all the time is most certainly going to lead to burnout. The other way that trauma can lead to burnout is if you are in a situation where you have leadership on your team where someone is activating that trauma over and over again. So, lashing out at you, minimizing your success, not giving you the support that you need. So from leadership down, you can affect this because people are going to get more burnt out if you're not responding to them in humane ways, and they're having those reactions over and over again. So it's a twofold thing: your own trauma and how you respond to just life in general, and then leadership can affect burnout by their own trauma and how they treat their teams, right? And then in terms of the imposter thing, anytime any of us try something new, we have a little bit of imposter syndrome. That's human. But when we have trauma, or we come from a background that we haven't actualized or integrated into our reality, we are always afraid of getting found out. There's a big fear of getting in trouble by people who grew up with getting in trouble a lot, right? There's a big fear that I am not worthy from people who were not loved and nurtured by their parents, right? Achievement, high achievement, in my experience, doing this for 25 years, is often an indicator of insecurity, right? I'm trying to earn validation. I'm trying to earn my dad loving me that never did. I'm trying to prove myself. And so if I'm always trying to approve myself, I will always have that imposter syndrome, because there's some part of me that feels like I'm not worthy of these things, or I'm not good enough to have these things. And it doesn't matter how much money you make or how big your job is. If you don't deal with that, you're going to have the imposter syndrome. Because what never fixes imposter syndrome? Success. It's an endless vortex of not enough. So, okay, I'll just get this promotion. Oh, I'll get this fancy house. Okay, I'll get this spouse that, looks good on the outside. Okay, I'll get this other promotion. I'm making all this money. I still am not good enough. That's not the solution. The solution is inside.
That's dropping some gems in here.
Because I know people who are absurdly successful, absurdly, and they're like, it's not enough. It's not enough. It's not enough. It's not enough. And the things that build self-esteem are learning to treat yourself and the people around you with respect, doing the laundry, doing the meditation, doing the journaling, being kind to the barista. These are the things that build self-esteem, not achievement.
I love that. I'm going to be doing an episode on your fixing your leadership mindset in a couple weeks. But that is so true. It's even when running a business, before I got my mindset right, there was always something wrong. I always found something else. There's another leak in the boat. I covered the leak, and then there's another hole that I found. And I'm like, does that hole really need my attention? But it's you manufacture more holes, right?
Well, it's a trauma response. It's if you have an addiction and the shoe's always dropping, you're always looking. The brain gets wired for chaos. The brain gets wired for constantly being hyper vigilant, right? And so when that happens, then we do look for problems even when things are fine. And obviously you've changed, so people can change. It takes a lot of work though, right? You have to work on it.
Yeah, Blythe, thank you so much for joining us. And I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us. And what closing words, maybe 2 sentences, would you leave people with just to sum up what we talked about today?
Well, first of all, if you're watch this whole thing, then you're on the right track because it means you're willing to either look at yourself or look at your team member with empathy and actualize some sort of change. Okay. The next thing is don't just listen to this, take some of these action steps, and realize that if you're going through this kind of leadership style on your team, or if you're the person doing this at work, don't let your shame or fear that you've done something catastrophically wrong stop you from getting better. Because at the end of the day, changing the way you lead, changing the way that you interact with human beings is going to be that piece of building your self-esteem. It's going to make you feel better in the world. You're actually healing your own trauma by addressing this issue. And it's very brave. And I think it takes a special kind of human being to go, yeah, that's me. I think I'd like to work on this.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I love how you said brave and courageous, because and it's like you ask yourself what kind of life you want to live. It gets exhausting to be stressed out all the time or to care about too much and I'm not saying you shouldn't care, but I just think there's like, as Blythe said, like going internal and really not letting the external world control you in a way that is just really bad for your mental and physical health.
It really was. Yeah.
So thanks, folks, for joining us today. I will leave the links for Blythe if you'd like to get a hold of her in the show notes, and we'll see you next time.